Welcome. I want to thank you for coming to today's session, transforming documentary trade finance with generative AI. This is an exciting collaboration with ANZ, Lloyds, HSBC, and International Chamber of Commerce Digital Standards Initiative. I'm Lucy Lee from Microsoft, and today I'm joined by industry leaders Pamela Mar from ICC Digital Standards Initiative, Janakiraman from ANZ, Bhriguraj Singh from HSBC, and Surath Sengupta from Lloyds. Our shared vision is to eliminate paper from global trade. But more importantly, by doing so, we'll finally be able to unlock the data so we can enable real-time treasury. Today, we're going to start with the industry discussion on why this is such an important initiative. And we'll also follow by a bank discussion and also a Microsoft demo to show you a sneak peek of our prototype that we're developing and the bank integrations requires. I'll start with Pamela. Pamela, from ICC DSI's vantage point, can you just maybe tell us why trade digitization is so complex and so challenging? And how do you think we can overcome some of these barriers?
Okay, thank you, Lucy. And thank you all for coming in the midst of a very busy Cybos week. So I'm just going to cut to the chase. The magic of trade digitalization is in the data and in sharing the data and aggregating data so that you can eliminate a lot of the time consumed in checking, so you can eliminate fraud that is due to misuse of data, so that you can basically have traceability throughout the supply chain. Now, why isn't data being treated in this way right now? So data standardization, so there's too many data standards. They don't align. When you want to share data, you can't connect automatically. And so we are on a mission at the Digital Standards Initiative to basically create that interoperability of data. Now, we can do that by converging industry behavior to a finite set of digital data standards, but it still won't cover the vast majority of data which is embedded in corporate ERPs. The first mile and last mile issue basically deal with corporate ERPs. So we're on a mission to basically figure out how do we bridge the gap between trade platforms, which may be standardized, and corporate ERPs, which are not standardized. Because basically, if you're using a corporate ERP with non-standard data, you won't change that data. There's no way you can. Everything about your company is embedded in that data. So we're looking at, yes, we're trying to converge industry behavior, but we're also looking at how do we use technology to bridge those gaps so that even if you're a smaller or medium-sized enterprise without a big IT capability, you can actually still play in the world of digital trade. So that's when we began discussing with Microsoft, how do you use technology to bridge interoperability gaps? And luckily, we now have a use case which is generated through the ICC Banking Commission. And anyone who wants to know about the Banking Commission, please talk to Tomasz Kubiak, who's right here. But we've got 3 members of the Banking Commission who have agreed to take part. So our investigation case is actually letter of credit, and we're using what's called a bank-defined data set which was developed by the Banking Commission and ICC, which is basically trying to figure out how do we repurpose supply chain operational compliance data so that it can be directly ingested by banks without a lot of documentation, checking, time, and so on. Our whole goal is single source of truth. The single source of truth comes from trade documents, and that's what we want to use. So that's kind of the background to how we got together. The bank-defined data set is something that we just developed this year. It's very experimental, but our goal is use compliance, transaction, and commercial data in order to drive the financing process to make trade finance easier for banks to issue.
Okay, great. I want to take a corporate's perspective because a lot of us here work with corporates. So I'm hoping that Hari, as you are looking at modernizing trade finance at NZ, what kind of complexities have you encountered, and why do you think ERP connectivity is so important to the corporates and also to the bank?
Yeah, sure. And good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. So Pamela already touched upon this. So when you look at trade digitization, and we have been talking about it for quite a while. There are a few things which are uh, always been impediments for us to do so. One is lack of standards, and what we have today is we have the key trade uh, the bank data document standard, so which means we have something to rely on. The second thing is it is just the complexity and the technology which is involved in doing digitalization. So that's the second part, and that's what we are going to talk about here. And then there is a lack resistance to digitalization because it's very hard for companies to have manual processes and digital processes go together. And in trade, it is a lot more compounded because unless there's a view that unless you digitized everything, it is not no longer useful. So and some of what we discussed today is going to set us in a direction where it can slowly start getting to that place. So that's the main thing. Now, from a corporate's viewpoint, their perspective is we already capture a lot of this information in our ERP systems. So we have this information in ERP systems. We need to extract this information and give it to our trade finance provider to do their processing. And if there is a way for us to avoid multiple steps in doing so, and the ability to use GenAI and different agentic AIs to interpret the data, extract the data, and then provide the data in a form which can be used to create trade finance instructions to the bank is going to be a significant step in terms of how corporates look at it. So that is the attractiveness for our customers when they look at it as saying that, okay, this is, from our perspective, it goes back to the same thing. One is it's not creating another manual step for them. As much as possible, it is trying to avoid and automate the manual step. It is using standards which did not exist before. The one thing which is missing, and we have not talked about it here, but it's all probably if you are in trade, it's on your minds, is the, the inconsistent legal framework we have across the globe, which is slowly but surely being solved. So once that comes into place, and we have the trifecta of what we need to digitize.
Okay, okay. Just before we jump into the demo, I want to talk about the approach we've collectively taken with the three banks. It's very important. Our guiding principle is it has to be a decentralized solution, but it also has to be embedded in the seller, the exporter's workflow today. We don't want to force the seller to change the systems that they use. So we're looking at what we call early stage trade finance connector. This connector will be installed in the seller's, the exporter's environment. It will connect seamlessly to the ERP. And in this case, our proof of concept focuses on Dynamics 365 ERP. And we will pull the data and then ingest it by the bank's trade finance platform.
Can I just add one
Yeah,
thing?
of course.
So the principle is that no one has to change their data. No one has to change their ERP.
Yeah.
Because any solution which relies on people changing what's in their ERP will not fly. So this is like a universal connector that can actually work with any ERP, even though, actually these three banks, they're all using different systems, right? So we want something which is not system proprietary because that just replicates the fragmentation we have today. It has to be universal and it has to be able to work at scale and not require individual configuration. That was a challenge. And
Exactly.
luckily, your team said, no problem. So let's hear about it.
I think our architecture is designed flexible enough so that it will allow through AP connection configure to connect to different ERP systems. like I said, we're testing with Microsoft Dynamics 365. What's really important here is that we're extracting the bank-defined data sets. We are following the KT, DDE, key trade documents, and data elements. And also the bank-defined data set that for LC, for letters of credit. And basically, the connector extract only the required data elements, package it for secure transfer to the banks. What the banks can then do is you can also customize and add additional data elements that you need for your compliance purposes. So for instance, if you need to add LC dates in the process of packaging the data, we'll be able to attach that, extract it from MT700 messages, and then package all of it and move it over to the bank. What I really want to emphasize as well, being Microsoft, is that we are testing the use of generative AI and agentic AI in this process. So inside the Trade Finance Connector, as you will see, there will be an AI assistant that is actually allowing a conversational type of interaction for the Treasury users to ask questions about the LC, about whether I'm extracting the right invoices or not. Does it conform with between the MT700 and all the different data elements I've extracted? Now, we all know there are discrepancies between different trade documents. So you could have buyer names, you could have shipping location. There are a number of discrepancies we often detect, and we detect on the bank side. What we want to do is use AI to detect those discrepancies and fix it before the data is transferred. This is an instant transfer of data packages, so it eliminates the DHL, couriers, all that from one bank to another bank. It also allows the banks to communicate with the seller, with the client, through this connector and give them status. So instead of saying you can track your LC by the DHL number and wherever your data is traveling, your packages, that's exactly what the LC is. Now you're able to track the real-time status. Now, we're really shortening the time here. But the other thing, as I mentioned, generative AI allows the treasurer to pull in additional data elements that allow you to perhaps discount the LC. So if you have information on the interest rates, on the bank risk rating, any sort of market events, you could choose as a treasurer to discount an LC at that moment in time. So I just want to also highlight this. Now let's take a look at the demo. I want to emphasize this is a prototype, so the UI is going to change.
This is the dashboard the user sees upon logging in the Trade Finance Connector. In this scenario, we have an Australian metals exporter and a Japanese buyer. They have just received a letter of credit. MT700 messages can be hard to read. On this screen, you'll see how the connector extracts the key terms from the LC and presents them neatly and clearly. The embedded AI assistant uses GenAI technology to allow users to interact with the data received from their bank. With API integration to Microsoft Dynamics 365 ERP, they can retrieve invoices stored in the system. Here they select the invoice in Australian dollars to attach to the transaction. Selecting the invoice triggers an agentic action by the AI assistant to validate the invoice details against the LC. The AI assistant identifies a currency mismatch and suggests that the user choose a different invoice to align with the LC. The user asks the AI assistant for help. The AI assistant suggests another invoice in US dollars that matches the LC terms. Automating data validation using agentic AI helps save time and effort for the seller. It also reduces the risk of errors when the bank receives the LC documents and minimizes delays caused by document resubmissions or back-and-forth communication between the advising bank and the seller. The user reselects the correct invoice. A preview of the invoice can be generated for manual validation. This entire selection process can also be handled autonomously by the AI assistant. The AI assistant checks the new invoice and runs a quick data validation. Validation complete, the invoice matches the LC. After verifying the required document datasets, the user can generate data packages for submission. On this screen, the system detects that only one document has been verified and the packing list is still missing. Once all required documents are attached, the user can submit the complete data package to the bank through the connector.
Actually, before we go there, I still want to wrap up with bank integration, so let's take another few minutes. Um, so what you saw, like I mentioned, is like a prototype. We're still refining the UI. We're still, as we are testing the AI assistant, we are noticing that there are additional capabilities that we can actually build into this. So for instance, as you know, in the invoices, there are multiple lines of goods, multiple descriptions, weight, everything is details that are very well defined, but sometimes not entirely captured. So we're able to build a much more comprehensive UI. So this is still work in progress. So we will continue to build on this. Happy for your input. Um, I want to now touch on integration because, as with all of you, you have already trade finance platforms that you use today. And like we say, our guiding principle on the seller side is not to change the seller's ERP systems. On the bank side, we're not hoping the banks change their trade finance platform. So I'm hoping, Bhriguraj, you can mention and talk about how this fit in with HSBC's trade finance technologies and how you see this innovation will kind of help you advance your trade finance capabilities.
Certainly. Uh, at HSBC, we are big believers in the benefits of trade digitalization, both to the individual firm as well as the ecosystem at large in terms of safety, speed, efficiency, cost savings. But we're equally aware of the challenges of digitizing this really complex system. We've been at it for a long time. There is no real benefit in trade digitalization unless there is a certain critical mass, a certain sort of inflection point that is reached, and there is certainly no first mover advantage in trade digitalization, which is why the number of innovative solutions that the industry has put together over the last decades haven't really scaled. This one, I think, for the reasons that Pamela and Hari have mentioned, is slightly different in that it's building upon standards that have been set by the industry. It is going to extract data without making the individual firm having to change its process. And then it allows the users of that data to consume it again in a manner that doesn't sort of have to change their process. Our efforts in HSBC are sort of threefold. We connect with sort of solutions like this, where our clients want to give us data instead of documents. We digitize processes in our own sort of environment. So we've been investing in technology that allows us to sort of receive and exchange information through APIs. And then, of course, we work with ICC, DSI, and other industry bodies to sort of advocate sort of change across the industry. In this particular case, we're going to consume the data of the invoices, of the packing lists, in the standards that we worked with ICC to stipulate through APIs. The APIs that we're going to use in this particular case is a file ingestion API. We can very easily change that into an API that consumes the data and integrates directly. And as volumes pick up, we will make the investments. But we've got the ability to actually create APIs and ingest data based upon the volumes that we see. So this is an important step that takes out the sort of friction. There is, like I said, there is no firms will not spend money to adopt digitalization. You've got to make it as easy for them to go on this journey, and Microsoft sort of POC does that. And we hope this is the first step. The next is, I guess this can go in multiple ways. You can get more ERPs to adopt these same data elements. So more ERPs, more accounting softwares will start sending us data of invoices and packing lists. You could also go in the other way, expanding the number of documents, because a packing list and invoice isn't a complete set of documents. So you've got to add that on. And I guess the bigger challenge will be, how do you digitize third-party documents? So this is what the firm has. How do you digitize a bill of lading? It is there. How do you integrate that in? How do you integrate a certificate of origin? And then how do you get the users of this information to consume? So it's an important first step, but there's a journey to travel, as there always is.
Yes, that's very true. And I'll add on to that too. We chose the most complex part of the LC process. The buyer side has already been digitized. We all know that. And the reason we're choosing the very complex part is because we believe that generative AI can make a difference here. We believe that the use of large language model with a dynamic context-aware approach is going to allow us to improve the accuracy of getting that data out of the documents, even if the documents, let's say a certificate of origin or an insurance certificate was issued on paper, we're still able on the seller side digitize that and extract the data so that everything that travels to the bank, in our vision, should be data packages. I think this is a great time for Surath to talk about what Lloyd's approach is when it comes to third-party integration, because Lloyd's has been experimenting a lot in this space. And I think if you can just speak to how this innovation fit in with everything else you're experimenting and you have deployed so far.
No, thank you, Lucy, and great to be here. Thanks, everyone. At Lloyds, we've been pioneering quite a bit around digitalization of documentary trade. I mean, open account is fully digital, so that bastion's conquered. It's the documentary trade which we are trying to digitize quite significantly. And we've had some really good success. So we've seen success over the last 2 years. It's 6x over the previous year in terms of number of transactions which are digital. Every company who's gone into digital trade have not gone back to paper. I think those are very, very impressive statistics. Having said all of that, less than 1% of global trade is digital. That documentary trade. That's reality, right? So there needs to be a vision. There needs to be a vision in terms of what are we trying to collectively achieve. It can't be achieved by one bank, or even a collection of banks. It has to be across the banking industry, across fintechs, technology companies like Microsoft. So great that you've come forward, shipping lines, all of this. This is the ecosystem that has to come together to really make it happen. And for that, we need to connect it. So ICC DSI has taken the first step in terms of creating standards, right? It's like a vocabulary bridge. If something is a date of shipping in one, it's called a shipping date somewhere else, it's called something else somewhere else. DSI creates that vocabulary bridge that different systems can use to interpret, and Microsoft can then help ingest it. But it still leaves us with some of the challenges which some of my fellow speakers have already spoken about. Yes, we can extract data from the client's ERP and really ingest it. But what about the bill of lading, which is not in a client's ERP? It's a shipping document. So that's why we've connected this. So this is where the ecosystem comes into play, right? So that's why we've connected this with Enigio. Give everybody a wave, Patrick. So Enigio we've connected with Enigio because Enigio has bill of lading in a digital format, so you can extract data from there. The other problem that we want to solve is corporate adoption, right? Large corporates can still adopt it because they have ERPs, their treasurers, their back office systems can get into this. But what about SMEs? How do we get them to adopt? Again, we have to give them, not just say, okay, here is a solution, now read this data using digital, readable technology that you have. They don't have it. That's not what they are trying to do. So we have to give them something which they can visualize. It's digital, but they can visualize it like it's on paper. So that's why, again, we've connected them to different technologies where a digital bill of exchange is available, or a digital promissory note, or a digital bill of lading. It looks and feels like paper, but it's digital from which data can be ingested. So that's how this needs to be expanded massively. I think DSI has done a great job. I think as ICC Banking Commission, at some stage we need to also think that we, in our rules, ICC rules, which is on which the rule-based trade happens, it still refers to documents. Even EUCP refers to documents. So I think at some stage we need to start thinking, when do we move from documents, even in rules, to data?
Thank you. I know there's no silver bullet. I'm sure everyone in the audience, all the banks know this. There's only so much you can digitize on the bank side. If the documents are coming to you, banks are acting like document processing centers for these corporates. I think in today's age, we're in 2025, going to 2026 where AI is going to become a part, hopefully, as human intelligence, we should really start thinking about how do we come together as an industry, even if we make baby steps. At least we're making progress. We'll work together, we'll iterate together. There are many organizations digitizing the e-bill of lading. Every part of the supply chain is individually trying to make a progress, and I think this is time, call to action for the banking industry to step up. Let's work with our corporate and mid-market, our small business clients, and let's try to digitize trade together. I want to thank the three banks, being the frontier firms, taking this leap to get us started. We would like many more banks to join the conversation, give us your input, and tell us how we can actually take this forward, because this is an industry solution we're building. We need the banks to be all looking at this. And so thank you very much for coming. This afternoon at the SWIFT panel for Standards Forum, we'll be speaking more about the use of data standards, and we'll also be talking about how we've tested GenAI for trade documents and the intelligence that we're able to see. So if you're free at 2:30, come to the SWIFT Standards Forum to do a deeper dive with us. Thank you very much for coming.